Okay. Good morning, everyone. Oh, Shania's still there. Good morning, Shania. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Thursday, November 26th. We're in the end of week 12, going into the last week next week. Adil's like, yeah, that's about right. You ready for a break?
Yeah.
Me too. Me too. Right, so don't forget, tomorrow there is no class because I won't be here, so you can stay home and diligently work on your papers, or you can come in here and work on your papers. There'll be nobody in this room, so you can come in and work. Online people, of course, you are on your own, but yeah, don't forget about that. Quiz next Wednesday, and I think they're on, I put that in Microsoft Teams. I think I said classes 31 to 42, 41 or 42, something like that. It's okay. I put it in Microsoft Teams, so it's there for you. We'll do things the same way as we normally do. Yeah. Okay. Let's. What's that?
40.
40? Okay. Oh wow, it was easy on you guys. Good morning. Okay. So let's see who's here. Zion's here. Good morning, Zion. And Jack is here. Here. Good morning, Jack. Vicky's here. Hello, Vicky. Clara's here. Hi, Clara. Daniel's here. Good morning, Daniel. John's here. Good morning, John. Gabrielle is here. Good morning, Gabrielle. Chan's here. Morning, Chan. Sala's here. Hello, Sala. And Sabrina. Hello, Sabrina. And Mike is here. Good morning, Mike. Right. So, yesterday we were talking about religious oppression, right? The sort of systematic disadvantage of one religious group or in comparison to other religious groups in a society, right? And we said that Canada, in Canada, the dominant group are Christians. Sorry, I stepped in some mud this morning. Eek. I'm gonna have to do some cleaning later. So the dominant group is Christians in Canada, although there's a fairly large percentage of people who are non-religious. But probably the most important thing to pay attention to here is the minority groups, because again, they are in a minoritized group. They are a minority. They are a small group of people. And like we mentioned, some of these religious groups are very easily identifiable in society, right? So they wear either clothing or religious symbols that sort of identify them as members of their religion. And again, there's nothing wrong with this, of course. I'm just saying that it makes them more easily identifiable to society, okay? So we said that, well, I'm going to jump ahead to this. We were talking about the Charter of Rights and Freedoms yesterday and the fact that it had a few precedents, right? There was the Universal Declaration of Human Rights by the UN in 1948. Canada had a Bill of Rights that it passed in 1960 until we got our final real version of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in the Constitution that clearly outlines the rights and freedoms you enjoy as a Canadian or as someone simply in Canada, right? So I mentioned the fact that, you know, what's really nice about this charter is that for the most part it applies to all of you, right? Whether you're citizens or not, or whether you have PR or a study visa or whatever you have, those rights and freedoms extend to all of you, which I really like. I think that's the way it should be. We were talking yesterday about, we focused in a little bit on the fundamental freedoms because we said that in those fundamental freedoms, that's what guarantees people freedom of religion, right? So people are allowed to believe what they want to believe. They're allowed to worship the powers or deities that they wish to worship. And they're allowed to express that belief to others, right? So again, they can wear religious symbols, they can say religious things, they can gather together peacefully for religious reasons, right? Whether it's a ritual or a festival or a mass or a prayer session or whatever it might be, people are allowed to come together and express their religious beliefs without any sort of, without restriction, right? But we did say that there were a couple of restrictions put on this, and one was reasonable limits, right? So people may exercise their rights and freedoms to a reasonable degree, right? So you can't kind of take some of these, to extreme, to an extreme place and expect them still to hold up, right? So you can expect reasonable protection under the law here. Another part of this is that you exercising your rights and freedoms cannot interfere with other people trying to exercise theirs, right? So usually that's okay, right? Usually those things don't come into conflict. But today we'll look at a case where, in fact, those rights do come into conflict, and we actually have to figure out whose rights are kind of more important. Whose rights should we pay more attention to? And sometimes it can be tricky, but usually you cannot exercise your rights in a way that limit others being able to exercise their rights. Okay. And then we said yesterday there's a notwithstanding clause, and that was it's a very strange term. Notwithstanding, we said, was kind of like although, or in spite of the fact, or never mind this over here, we're still going to do this thing, right? And a clause, not like a Santa Claus, but a clause is just like a piece of a contract, right? A particular section. And so we said that this notwithstanding clause allows governments to pass a law that actually violates the charter. And so really, I don't know that that should be allowed. I'm not entirely in agreement with that. But it exists, and it has been done. I don't think the federal government has ever used the notwithstanding clause. I think the Alberta government or the Saskatchewan government might have used it once or twice. But again, we said that Quebec has used it very frequently over the past 15 or 20 years. And they've done it in order to, more than 20 years, probably 40 years. They've used it very frequently in order to protect their kind of French culture and French language. And so there's lots of laws in Quebec that have to do with ensuring that people use French and learn French, and that French is the language of business and education, and signs are in French, and all of these kinds of things, right? And so they're kind of trampling a little bit on people's charter rights in order to protect the language and culture of one group, okay? And so that kind of led us to, sorry, I'm just jumping ahead here because we talked about this stuff, Quebec's ban on religious symbols. And we said that last year the Quebec government passed a law wherein if you are working for the government or receiving government services, you may not display religious symbols, right? And so we talked about that yesterday when we read this article, I Feel Like a Stranger Now, right? And in that article there was kind of the testimony or the experience of 5 women. I think there was 5 women, all of them Muslim women living in Quebec, talking about what their life looks like in kind of response to this newly passed law. And even though this law doesn't sound like a big deal from some perspectives, as it turns out, for women like this, it's actually a really big deal, right? It's changed a lot of aspects of their life. And what were they saying? What was their kind of reaction to the law? What kind of things were they thinking about? It's unfair and it's ridiculous, yes. What else were they saying?
They're being discriminated.
Yeah, that they're being discriminated against, right? We have a law that is supposed to, no, it's okay. I was like cheering for you. I was like, here it comes, she's gonna do it. Yeah, they're being discriminated against, even though this law appears to apply to everyone, it in fact does not, right? It really only applies to a very small minority, and a minority that is already minoritized and vulnerable and discriminated against just in general. What else were some of these women saying about how this affected their lives?
Instability and insecurity because of their careers and futures.
Yeah, these women felt that their careers and their futures were now uncertain and unstable, right? So some of these women were in the middle of their education or law careers. Some of these women were getting ready to enter university or were just ready to graduate university. And all of them had plans to live and work in Quebec, right? Where I think most or all of these women were born. And yet, now it seems they have to recalibrate their plans because they won't be allowed to work in education or in law because they wear symbols of their religion, right? What else were they saying?
They either have to abandon their simple costume or they have to leave.
Kind of, right? And that's kind of the unspoken thing, right? So the government is definitely not saying that, right? You won't find anyone in the government saying or writing anything like that. But that's kind of the implicit, right? The implied, that's kind of the implicit thing, right? Assimilate or go somewhere else, right? Be like us or get out, right? That's because what other choice do these women have, right? They have to abandon their religious principles or compromise their religious beliefs or freedoms, or not work, or just not work for the government, not work in the public sector. But that's basically the choice that's being offered to these women, right? But it's implicit. It's not explicit. It's not being made clear. What else do these women say?
Worry about their safety.
Right. So I think almost all of these women expressed some sort of fear for their safety, right? And so why does a law like this compromise the safety of women like this or people like this?
It triggers the opposing groups' prejudicial ideas to just come out and think like they have the right to just express their hatred towards them.
Yeah. So authority figures like governments have a lot of power. Well, they have a lot of power just regularly, like legally speaking, but they also have a lot of power in society. And so when governments start to support certain things, it makes it legitimate, right? They legitimize it and other people feel comfortable speaking up. And so if the government is fighting for or speaking for equality and an end to racism and an end to sexism, then other people will stand up and start to say, hey, we want that too. That's what we're fighting for. But if the government makes kind of racist or sexist comments, or they support legislation that is discriminatory in some way, then people with those views will step up and they'll start to more loudly say what they think, right? So the government has a lot of power here in kind of creating the country they want. And if they make space for people who are looking for equality and an end to discrimination, those people will have some space to speak. If the government passes something that's discriminatory, people who are racist and sexist and misogynist, they will feel empowered to speak, right? What do we say about number 6? Graduate student there, Bara Arar, I hope that's the right way to pronounce her name. Bara Arar, Ms. Arar says, people who are not affected by the bill or people who do not identify with those affected don't understand the immediacy of these politics. What's she talking about there?
Like people in the dominant group doesn't understand what she's going through. This law doesn't affect them, so they feel like this is a normal thing. But to her, this is
Yeah. Yeah, very true, right? So people who are not affected by the bill, which is probably most people, if you look at Canada, most people are Christians who do not really display any religious symbols, and then 30% of people are non-religious, right? So a good 80% of Canadian society, probably more, would not be affected by a law like this, right? And so lots of people would look at this and say, well, so what's the big deal, right? Because they don't wear religious symbols, so what does it matter if the government passes this law? But Yeah, for a small portion, it does, right? What else was kind of part of this? Yeah, that's the invisibility of privilege thing. People don't see, most Canadians might not, or most Quebecers might not see how this is discriminatory or how this law is a problem. And of course, they don't even have to worry about it, right? Because it doesn't really affect them. And so they can choose to ignore such a thing. But that's what Mizorar is saying here, is that, you know, you don't understand the immediacy of these politics, because suddenly this law places a choice before me, right? Assimilate or go somewhere else, right? And it's interesting. If it's meant to assimilate people, it's not working, because do any of these women say, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna take off my hijab or my headscarf and just, you know, go to work? Does anyone say that? No, they're all saying, I'm gonna go somewhere else, right? I'm gonna go to Toronto or to Calgary or to United Arab Emirates or wherever. They're gonna go somewhere else, right? Yeah. And so what do we say, how does a bill like this get passed? How do we wind up with a law like this? Yeah, so the dominant group in Quebec, which is sort of white French Quebecois people, yeah, they have institutional power in the province, and they can kind of pass these laws. You know, they pass the laws that benefit them, right? And again, this benefits, at the very least, this has no effect. Like if you are a white French person in Quebec, at the very least, this makes no difference to you, right? Or I was going to say at best or at worst, it depends on how you look at it, but at worst or best, you actually are advantaged by it, because there are people who you might normally compete with for jobs that now can't work in those jobs, right? And so it might be easier for you to get a job there. So it might actually benefit white French people in the province. How else does this get passed? Dominant groups in power. There might be another thing we can add to this. Yeah. How else? Yeah. So on the surface, this law appears to apply to everyone, right? So they didn't say this isn't a law prohibiting Muslim women from wearing hijab or from covering their head. That's not what the law is. The law is nobody may wear religious symbols at work, right? Nobody. But again, that's a bit of a cover, right? Because again, whether you say it applies to everyone or not, it doesn't really apply to everyone, right? It really applies to a particular group of people. It just looks like it applies to everyone. So it's kind of they're trying to make it they're trying to make it sound less controversial, but it doesn't matter. You can call something whatever you want. It is what it is, right? This is the thing I thought of, and maybe you can disagree with me on this if you want, but do you feel that there is anti-Muslim prejudice in Quebec, also in Canada, but in Quebec just regularly? Don't know? To some degree that is true. But I think we could probably agree that there is kind of a anti-Muslim sentiments throughout the Western world at this point in history, right? And so The other part of this might not only be sort of the invisibility of privilege, and the fact that French Quebecers can ignore this, but also the minoritized group that this affects, many people might have kind of prejudicial ideas about anyway. They might not really like the idea of Muslims in their province or in their country so much anyway. So are they going to be sympathetic to this? Maybe not so much, right? So there's two things going on. There's the fact that this law doesn't really apply to most people in Quebec, and then the people that are affected, some Quebecers may not have as much sympathy for, right? And so that may be an issue as well. I'm kind of just guessing. I could be wrong about that. Yes.
Can I ask something?
Yes.
Is religion like socially constructed, or is it just?
Well, it depends who you ask, right? And so, if you ask someone who is very strongly religious, and if you ask them, is your religion socially constructed? Is it just made up by people? You might get a different answer, right? So if you asked an anthropologist or a sociologist, they would say yes. They would say that religion is something that is constructed by human beings, and it's constructed for all kinds of different reasons. It meets a number of different needs in terms of being part of a group, explaining things that cannot readily be explained, providing sort of comfort in the face of, again, things that are frightening that we don't understand or can't control. It works as kind of a social glue that holds people together and gets them to work well together. In some cases, it provides kind of a moral code of what's good and bad and right and wrong. And sometimes it gives you an incentive for being good, because if you're good, you get into the good place, which is a good show, by the way. You get into the good place, and if you're bad, you go to the bad place, sometimes, depending on the religion. So an anthropologist or a sociologist would say yes, that humans construct religions for all kinds of different reasons. It's basically a human cultural universal. So all human cultures have some form of religion or spiritual practice or set of beliefs, although they're all a little bit different. But again, it's a difficult thing, because when you ask someone who is religious and believes in their religion, they're not going to say it's socially constructed. They're going to say, no, we follow the word of God, right? Or the word of whatever power they worship. So yeah, I would sort of steer clear of that, because that's a different thing. But if you asked how science would look at it, science would say, yes, it's something humans create for themselves for a wide variety of reasons. And it seems that all human cultures do it in one way or another.
Wait, so did for the Bible, did God write the Bible, or humans write the Bible?
Well, it depends who you ask. If you ask, Christians or Jews, then yeah, the Bible is the Word of God. Although it's written by people, right? So all of the different sections of the Bible are actually, are written by people, but it's still the Word of God. With the Quran is a little different, though. The Quran is supposed to be exactly the Word of God, written by God, right?
No,
Yeah.
Written by the prophet.
Yeah. But he was just taking dictation from Allah, right? Yeah, so it depends a little bit. So the Quran is, I think, more supposed to be the exact word of God. The Bible is a collection of different books that are kind of the word of God, but told through different people, or that tell the story of what happened with Jesus and in relation to God. So, again, if you talk to, and I know I'm talking just about Christianity, but that's what my experience is, because I was raised Catholic. So people who believe, of course, believe it's the Word of God. Historians and anthropologists and people like that are, people just wrote these things for whatever reason. Not for whatever reason. Yes? Yeah, ask.
Because right now, religion brings up a lot of social issues where people are fighting between themselves, especially with the dominant religion.
Mm-hmm.
Do you reckon religion brings more good or more harm in that sense? Because on one hand, it binds people together and brings, like, gives people hope and answer, gives explanation to questions we don't have answers to.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, people are starting to fight between themselves. So, is it better or worse?
I think, yeah, so the question is religion a net good or a net bad, right? So there's lots of good things that come from religion in terms of binding a community together and explaining the nature of the universe and, giving us comfort that we are all here for a reason and we're not just, monkeys on a ball spinning through space, right? It gives us things, but it also, religion can be damaging, right? Both within a society and, when different religions come into conflict. And so, yeah, is religion a net good or a net bad? And what do you think about that?
Like there's a thing in Quran which says like dogs are, I don't know what do you say for that? Like we should not keep them at our houses, like inside the houses. We should just keep them in the yards or anything because they bring diseases, which is not true. So
They're definitely dirty. They'll
Yeah.
bring dirt into your house.
Yeah, but it said that they bring dirt and it's like abandoned, so we cannot. But actually, the reason that it's written like they say that is because in Arabic countries, I don't want to be racist, but that's the thing they say that in Arabic countries when they wanted to like steal something from someone's house, the dogs didn't allow them, so they passed the law so people won't keep them at houses. So it became I don't know, something in the book.
Yeah.
So people can't keep dogs. So that and when I like hear those things, I'm a Muslim like in my country, but since I've gotten here, like if anyone asks me, I'm just saying I just believe in only God. So I don't really have a religion because it looks like it's old and socially constructed, like everything. So I don't know if it's true or not, but it's like 1400 years ago, so no one exactly believes. Maybe I'm wrong, but
It's true, and that's another kind of, there's a degree of shading as well, right? There are people who, in any religion you speak of, who are just like hardline, fundamental. They believe every word in whatever book they believe in, and there's no questioning at all. And then there's people who are like, I believe in Allah or I believe in God, but, these books are just kind of, they're really old. They're full of all kinds of weird stuff, and we just need to like pull the general themes out of this book. We don't need to, we don't need to pay attention to every word and every letter and believe every single thing that is said because, yeah, these things are thousands of years old. They're written by, well, not in the case of Quran, but in the case of the Bible, they're thousands of years old. They're written by all kinds of different authors. There's some crazy stuff happening in the Bible. If you read the Old Testament, it's a wild ride in the Old Testament. There's all kinds of weird stuff happening in there. The New Testament is very tame, but the Old Testament there's wars and slayings and people seducing their fathers and people being turned to stone, and there's all kinds of interesting stuff going on in the Old Testament. So yeah, there's people who believe very fundamentally in like the exact to the letter interpretation of their book or their religion. And then there are people who are like, I believe in God or Allah, but these books are really old. We just need to sort of, we need to read between the lines a little bit and just take the general lessons of what come out of these rather than worry about, not keeping dogs because, because it says so, right? So that's another thing too, is that there are people who, the sort of, their investment in the belief or the degree to which they follow every single letter of the law, that will vary too, right? So that's a difference there. But what do you think? Is religion a net good or a net bad? Does it do more harm than it does good, or the other way around?
Yeah, I think it's a net good because it gives some people hope to be, yeah, it gives people hope. Like some people like feel lost in life and they believe in religion, so like it brings them up.
Yeah, it gives people hope, right? And it gives people some sense of meaning. And I can't even remember if we talked about this, but I think at the beginning of this class we talked about anthropologist Clifford Geertz saying that humans are makers of meaning, right? Humans need to know what things mean, right? They need to understand the world they live in. My cat does not. She doesn't need to understand the world she lives in at all. She just experiences it, and she's either happy or sad or pouty, which is usually what she is. But humans are different, right? Humans need to know, right? We need to understand. And so religion does help us understand things that, currently, even in 2020, we're not really able to know for sure, right? Science can't tell if there's a God, right? Science can't tell what happens to you after you die, right? These are big questions that people want the answers to that, even today science cannot give you the answer to. And certainly thousands of years nobody knew either. So yeah, religion is a comfort, and it's a source of hope for people. And that's important, right? What else do you think? Is it good? Is it bad? Bit of both?
Like, you know how they say if you do something bad, you will end up in the bad side?
Hope not.
I've always, because in our country we should be Muslim, so, and our books and everything, so when, I was a child, and if I did something, I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, yeah.
Yeah, that's the other thing that anthropologists and sociologists would say too. It's a means of social control, right? So if you want to have rules in society, if you want to have people follow the rules so that society can exist in a productive way, you need rules, and then sometimes you need incentives, right? So if you follow the rules, you get this, and if you don't follow the rules, this happens to you, right? So it's a nice, it's a means of social control. If you break social rules, if you don't behave, you're going to the bad place, right? And so that's very useful for just communities, but also for leaders of communities. They can exact some sort of control over the population, with religion. And again, that's not necessarily a bad thing either, right? Because having rules in society is good, right? It's very comfortable to know that I can sit here and none of you are going to murder me, right? That's, I think, right? Yeah, so that's very nice, right? I enjoy the fact that murder is illegal and I don't have to worry about anyone murdering me usually. So some form of social control is good, right? It's good for society. And religions can help do that, especially in, if you think thousands of years ago, now we have a police force, right? But police forces are relatively new. And for most of human history, there was really no such thing. And so, maybe it was useful to be able to believe in and imagine an all-powerful being who, if you did murder your neighbor, you would be sent to the most awful place you can imagine for the rest of eternity, right? Maybe that's a useful form of social control, right? This is very interesting. It's very interesting. Okay, do you want to talk about the next thing? Because it has to do with religion. Well, of course it does. It's religious oppression. Has to do with this. It has to do with a case. This is a couple years ago now. Trinity Western University is a university here in the Lower Mainland. They're out in Langley, British Columbia. They're a smaller university, but they have a number of programs. So you can get an arts degree or science, or you can get a law degree from there. Yep, from Trinity Western. So they've got 45 undergraduate majors, which is not too shabby. 17 graduate and postgraduate programs. So that's pretty decent, right? That's certainly more going on than we have here for now. So they're a reasonable size university out in Langley, but they're also a privately funded Christian university. So you'll find if you go to UBC or SFU, you'll find that there's really no evidence of religion on campus at all, right? Beyond what the students might practice. So it's a secular institution. It's a non-religious institution. But here at Trinity Western, religion is kind of mixed in with the university, okay? So the university operates from a Christian perspective, okay? So what happened here had to do with, I believe it was called a Charter of Values. And so all Trinity Western students and staff, before they started at the university, were made to sign a pledge, okay? And they had to. This wasn't optional. If you wanted to be a student or a staff member at Trinity Western University, you had to sign this document. And what the document said was a number of things. And it was basically a code of conduct, right? So, I won't cheat, I won't, damage school property, I won't make a ruckus at night in my dorm room and keep everybody awake, and so on and so forth. But it also said a few other things. So it also said that that if you signed it, that you would not engage in sexual activity outside of marriage. Okay? So no sex for you while you're a Trinity Western student unless you're already married to an opposite sex partner. Okay? And it said a few other things as well, but that clause was the piece that was the biggest cause of controversy, okay? So what I'd like to do to kind of introduce this topic is we're just going to watch a short video, okay? And so just give me a second here. I just want to put this into Student Portal here.
Wait, I have a question.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, so if they have sex in the dorm, they'll kick them out.
Well, that's the thing, right? Is that how will anyone find out? But the thing is, it didn't just apply to on campus; it also applied off campus. So even if you lived off campus in an apartment, you were still not supposed to engage in any sexual activity unless you were married and it was your partner, right? Your husband or your wife. Sorry, just one more second here. Whoops. Okay, thank you very much. So in Microsoft Teams, for those of you who are online, I've just posted the questions that I want to ask you and the link to the video. The video is about 8 or 8.5 minutes long or so. And so what I'll ask you to do, online people, is I'll ask you to watch the video, and then we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll come back and talk about it, okay? So for online people, I'm going to put about 20 minutes on the clock, which should cover it. And then after 20 minutes, you'll watch the video, you'll take a break, and then we'll come back and talk about these questions, okay? So I'll turn you loose to do that. We'll see you in a bit. Unmute. There, now we're back. What's that?
Timer.
Oh, my timer's on. Okay. Whoops. So, hardly magic. Right. So, what I told the students here in class that online people I forgot to tell you before we went to the video. So the section of the program we watched was a show called 100 Huntley Street, and it's a Christian program. It's sort of a Christian news interview entertainment program. So it is coming from a certain perspective. It does have a certain bias, right? It has a pro-Christian bias, which you probably heard. So I should have probably mentioned that beforehand, but just so you know, they're definitely coming from that perspective on the show. I wanted to show you before we went on. I wanted to actually show you the covenant that we're talking about, and so this is it. You can find it online if you Google it. It's up there. So this is the community covenant agreement that that they were speaking of. And so I'm not sure if this is the exact version that they're talking about, because like the executive director of the university said, sometimes they go through and just make little changes and revise this thing. So it might not be exactly the same as it was in the past, but this is the one that they have right now. And so you can see here very clearly that the university's mission, core values, curriculum, and community life are formed by a firm commitment to the person and the work of Jesus Christ as declared in the Bible. So again, you won't find this at most universities. Most universities are secular. This one organizes itself according to Christianity and Christian teachings, right? And so, there's all kinds of stuff here, blah, 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 which we don't really care about. This is the part that's kind of important for what we're discussing here. And so this is what they're asking people. This is what they're asking people to kind of promise, right? So this is the community life at the university. This is what they're asking for. And so, they want people to cultivate Christian values and live exemplary lives and communicate in positive ways. And all of that is that's all very nice, right? And that's what we should do, hopefully. But here's the part that gets a little bit more controversial. So here, observe modesty, purity, and appropriate intimacy in all relationships. Reserve sexual expressions of intimacy for marriage, and within marriage, take every reasonable step, to resolve conflict and avoid divorce. Okay, so here they're saying basically only sex within marriage, right? You are not allowed to have sex outside of marriage, and this doesn't just apply to the campus, it applies to life, right? It still counts if you leave the campus and go to Vancouver and have sex with someone outside of marriage, you're still breaking the agreement, right? So it's not just on campus, it's everywhere, right? Well, they don't know unless somebody rats you out, right? Unless somebody tells on you. Let's see what else they have. Exercise careful judgment in all lifestyle choices. Now, I'm not sure what that means. Often people who are strongly religious or Christians who kind of disapprove of homosexuality, often they will describe homosexuality as a lifestyle choice, quote unquote. I don't know if that's what they're referring to here. You can see they have a little superscript, a little superscript 12 here. And if you scroll down, you'll see that relates to specific verses in the Bible. So I don't know exactly what they're saying here. And if I had a Bible, I would look it up, but I don't have one handy. So I'm going to leave it for now. Whoops. Let's see. So no gossip, so you can see all of the end notes here that they're citing what they're talking about, right? Let me just see. I just want to look here very quickly. So you can see it here again. Sexual intimacy that violates the sacredness of marriage between a man and a woman. right? So again, there's an implicit thing that no, you're not allowed to have sex outside of marriage, on campus or off. And B, marriage is between a man and a woman, right? So is there any same-sex sexual activity happening here? No, because you can't have sex outside of marriage, and you can't be married to anyone except the opposite sex. So there's kind of an implied, an implied sort of, well, homosexuality is not allowed, is what's being kind of said, right? Let's see. The use of materials that are degrading, dehumanizing, exploitive, hateful, or gratuitously violent, including but not limited to pornography. So that's basically all movies. There's lots of gratuitous violence. Drunkenness, underage consumption of alcohol or possession of illegal drugs, or the misuse or abuse of substances, including prescription drugs. So there's no getting drunk. I guess I don't know who gets to judge whether you're using alcohol appropriately or not, right? Usually that's a personal choice, but here I don't know if it is. Possession of alcohol on campus or at any TWU-sponsored event. And the use of tobacco on campus. So there's no smoking, there's no drinking, there's no sex outside of marriage, there's no sex with same-sex partners. There's none of that.
Wait, so this is the opposite of what universities are.
This is the opposite of what universities are. Well,
There's no way I'm gonna go to school.
well, here we go. So that's what the covenant is suggesting, right? And so they're asking all students and all staff or they were asking all students and all staff to sign this document. And if you break the pledge, if you break this agreement, then yeah, you can be fired or you can be expelled from the school. So that brings me to my first question here. What is actually at issue? What is the controversy here? From kind of a social justice perspective, but also from the perspective of Christians, because we heard from two Christians in that video interview, right? We heard from a professor of biblical studies, I think he was. That was John Stackhouse, and then Earl Phillips was the second interviewee, and he was the executive director of the university. So what's the controversy here? What are the two sides to this story?
The issue here is that the university has no party.
The biggest issue is that this university will have no parties. Well, there'll be parties. They'll just be dry,
Party with books.
in more ways than one. There'll be what?
Party with books.
A party with books is no party. Okay.
Yeah, like there's no alcohol, no tobacco.
I know. How will you have fun without alcohol and tobacco, right? How will anyone have fun? Okay, so that's an issue, right? This university sounds no fun. But what from a broader perspective, what's the issue here?
I think they're like making these rules and they're like making it a fact as if it's a religion of rules. Like, yeah.
Right. So they're creating. Let me just go back here. Yeah, they're creating a set of rules that are pretty clearly anchored in their religion, right? To the point where all of these rules have biblical references cited, right? So again, they're not citing research articles here. They're actually citing books in the Bible. So these rules clearly come from the Bible, and they are using those biblical ideas and biblical rules to create an agreement that they want people who attend the university and work at the university to sign, right? Give me more. What's that? Whose freedom and what freedom are we talking about?
Like non-Christian.
Okay, so people who are not Christian, what are their freedoms as connected to this?
Like if they not believe in those things, but order to stay in school.
Right. So there are, from one perspective, people who are not Christian might say, well, I don't believe I should have to do any of these things, right? I believe I should be able to drink and smoke and have sex with whoever I want, and it's none of your business if I'm going to your school, right? So some people that may be the perspective of non-Christians, right? What were the people in the video? What kind of views were they expressing?
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's a Christian school, so there would be it. Yeah, it's really extreme, but it's still a Christian school and they follow rules that they think are right for them according to the Bible. But right now, the state doesn't see them as equal, especially for the law students, right?
Yeah, and let me unpack that for you. So, yes, this is a Christian school, and they have rules that are kind of rooted in Christianity at this school. And of course, every school has rules, right? We have rules here at Columbia College. That's not strange. One of the things I wanted to unpack for you was this. So, Trinity Western had this community covenant in place, and they were asking people to sign it. Trinity Western was trying to get a law school. They were trying to start a law school, okay? And so in order for that to work, they have to be accredited by the Law Society of Canada. And so the Law Society has to look at their program and say that, okay, Trinity Western, you can create your law school, and when your graduates come out of law school, we will recognize them as properly trained lawyers, right? So you can't just set up a law school anywhere, because if the Law Society doesn't recognize your graduates, then you don't have a law school, you have a scam, basically, right? So the Trinity Western was asking the Law Society of Canada, can you please approve our law school so that our graduates will be recognized as lawyers, and then people will actually come to our law school. And the Law Society looked and they said, we don't like your community covenant, you need to get rid of it, or we won't recognize your law school. Trinity Western took it to court because they said, actually, we have freedom of religious belief and expression. Law Society of Canada, you're not allowed to deny us on this basis, right? That's discriminatory. They said the Law Society could deny Trinity Western if their program was just crappy, right? If it wasn't a good program, they could say, no, it's not good. But they're not allowed to say no based on religion. And so, again, this went to the Supreme Court of Canada because it had to do with the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. And the Supreme Court ruled against Trinity Western. And they said, no, you're not allowed to, or the Law Society of Canada is right to call this discriminatory, and the Law Society of Canada can not approve your law school for this reason. Okay? So that's what the decision was. And so Trinity Western thought they were being discriminated against in a religious way by the Law Society of Canada. And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court said, no, actually the Law Society may discriminate in this way because you are denying the religious freedom, or you're denying certain rights to your students and staff. Okay? And so it became a bit of a, this is where it gets complicated, okay? And I'm going to go back to here. This is where it gets complicated in terms of rights and freedoms being violated, because the Charter protects Christians, right? It protects people's religious beliefs and values, and it protects their religious expression. So Christians are allowed to believe what they want to believe, and they are allowed to express that belief within reasonable limits. Non-Christian people also have the right to have their beliefs and values, even though they may or may not be religious, and they have a right not to be discriminated against in terms of their marital status or their sexuality, right? You cannot discriminate against someone based on whether they're married or single, and you cannot discriminate against someone whether they're straight or gay, right? That's not allowed either. So we have the potential for two people's rights to be violated at the same time. If the Law Society says, no, you have to change your community covenant, you can't make people do this, is that discrimination against Christians? Or is Trinity Western University discriminating against people who either aren't Christian, who may want to go to their university and may want to behave in conflict with the charter, or maybe even Christians who just aren't as strongly Christian, right? Maybe there are people who believe in the Christian God and say, you know what, homosexuality is fine, I don't have a problem with it, right? Or sex outside of marriage, yeah, it's not a big deal, I don't care, I still believe in God, I still pray to him, blah, 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 but I don't agree with some of the things that the church argues or says. So who's being discriminated against here? Whose rights take precedence? The Christians who run Trinity Western University, or people who are gay or who are bisexual or pansexual, or just people who don't feel that they should have to follow these Christian rules because they're not Christian, or because they don't feel that these rules are quite so important for Christianity. Who's being discriminated against here?
I think Christians, they know how they should behave, so they will keep themselves from engaging in these activities.
Okay, so Christians know how their religion expects them to behave. So maybe why have to sign this thing in the first place?
No, I mean if
Okay.
they know it, then
Yeah.
non-Christians they shouldn't be forced to act in this way.
Mhm.
So I think they should remove it because Christians already know, and we can't force something on non-Christians.
Okay, so we almost have, in a way, we almost have a similar situation to the Quebec law banning religious symbols, right? So in theory, if Christians are already behaving in all these ways, which I don't know, but let's pretend that they are, then having to sign this is not a big deal, right? If you're already behaving in all of these ways, then sure, I'll sign it. That's not a problem, right? But if you are perhaps not Christian, or your values of Christianity differ slightly, right? Like you might be accepting of homosexuality and sex outside marriage and all of these things, then this thing does affect you, right? It discriminates against you. But as a Christian university, does Trinity Western have the right to demand that their students and staff behave this way?
Can
Yeah.
I think the Christian thing and the law thing, two different problems. It's a Christian school. You set your own rules. Yeah, it may be discriminatory, but it's what they believe in. That's like going into a church and saying, I don't believe what you do. Then what are you doing there in the first place? Secondly, the law thing. While I don't agree with their views, I agree that they are being discriminated against because the rules that they enforce do not affect a student's capability in the sense of studying.
Mhm.
So if they have a good course that teaches the students well, you are majorly discriminating against their religion simply because you do not agree with their views.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I don't know.
no, that's okay. This is a tricky one. That's why we're talking about it, because it is tricky. So yeah. So again, this is a reasonable question to ask, is that this is a Christian university. And if you're not Christian and you don't really want to follow Christian rules, which it sounds like some of us don't, then why on earth would you go there, right? Why would you go to, like you say, why would you walk into a Christian church and say, I don't believe what you're believing in? Like, don't do that. Just don't go to the church, right? Nobody's forcing you to go to the church. So there's that, right? And the other thing is, did the Law Society overstep their bounds, right? Did they discriminate against Trinity Western University because really what the Law Society should have been looking at is this a quality program, right? Will this law school train law students in a way that they will be competent, capable lawyers, right? And I think the answer to that was yes, that the law program was robust and it would properly train law students. So again, did the Law Society have any grounds to reject Trinity Western based on their community covenant? And interestingly, the Supreme Court said yes, right? That they actually can say no for this reason, that it's not discriminatory. Yeah.
I think, yes, you should try to reduce discrimination, and I get that they want the school to remove the rules that they set,
Mhm.
but isn't it counterproductive that to do that? Because if you say, you shouldn't discriminate against others, so to make you not do that, I'm gonna discriminate against you. It's so
It's interesting, right? And again, there's a question of maybe not so much discrimination. I know where you're coming at that, but if you turn around and come from a different angle, who is more deserving? Whose rights are more deserving of protection? Is the other question. And I think that might be where the Supreme Court came at this, not from who gets to discriminate against who, because in theory, nobody should get to discriminate against anyone, but whose rights are more in need of protection. I think that's how they may have come at this. But I think you're also right. I mean, there is the question of why would you go to a school in which has beliefs or values that you don't hold, right? There's a reason why I don't teach at a Catholic school and why I wouldn't teach at a Catholic school, because I'm not Catholic and I don't really believe that. So it would be difficult for me to have to either be in that environment and have to do things or say things that I don't believe in, or to have to sort of fight back against the fact that the entire school is operating according to values that don't align with mine exactly. So, I wouldn't teach in a Catholic school for that reason. But I think now that I look at some of these questions here, the purpose of the demonstration, I had another video. I think I had 2 videos at one point, and I seem to have lost one of them. So in one of them, you actually see students demonstrating against Trinity Western University. And on the break, I tried to find it, and I couldn't find it again. I don't know what I did with it. But there were definitely 2 sides to this story. But what do you think? Do you think this was resolved? So let me tell you how this was eventually resolved, okay? So the Law Society of Canada was backed up by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court said, yes, Law Society, you can actually say no to Trinity Western on these grounds, that you don't like their community covenant. You feel the community covenant discriminates against people, certain people. Supreme Court backed them up. The Law Society said, okay, Trinity Western, your move. And so Trinity Western looked at their community covenant, and what they did was they made it optional. So you do not have, but in the past you had to sign this community covenant if you wanted to be a staff or student at the college or at the university. Now it's only optional. You don't have to sign it. You may, but you also don't have to. So I think on that basis, and I'd have to look it up just to be sure, but I think Trinity Western was granted status, and they do have a law school now. I think. But that was Trinity Western's response, not to change the covenant, but just to make it optional. But what do you think? Was that the right call? Was Trinity Western and their Christians discriminated against? Were they discriminated against in order to uphold the rights of gay, lesbian, bisexual people, or people who just want to have sex outside of marriage or don't believe in marriage? Was it right that Trinity Western was forced to do this? complicated, right? Because we're seeing rights kind of come into conflict, right? Does Trinity Western's Christians have the right to practice their religion and have their views and have a school that follows Christian ideals? Or can they not have that because some people are disadvantaged by those rules? Yeah.
If you are teaching religion, yes, you are allowed to make whatever rules according to your religion. But this is a school, if you want to target it to the mass public, you should be accommodating to everyone. But if you decide that you want to be a Christian school, there should be rules that you are allowed to make. But I think it's the right call because they still keep what they believe in, because that's what the entire school is built on. That's the foundation of it, and you kind of need to keep the integrity of it for it to keep running. But it's not just a purely religious teaching school. So for students who want to go there, I don't know why I still don't understand why anyone would go there if you're not Christian, but...
And there's no parties.
Yeah, but if you really, for some reason, want to go there, they have a really good program. They should provide the option for students like that to attend their school. So I think that was the right call. And if they did eventually get granted, then I think that's good as well, because then nobody's discriminating against nobody anymore. So.
Well, except for maybe the Christians who I think, the ones that were interviewed in the video, I think they did feel discriminated against, right? One said, oh, the Charter of Rights is being turned on its head, right? It's being turned upside down. And it's like, well, yes, but also no, right? And so this is where it gets tricky, right? When you have two groups of people who have rights, but they are seemingly, well, not seemingly, they are actually in conflict, right? And again, the law program isn't teaching religion, it's teaching law. And so I was going to sum up what you said, but I don't think I can as well. So the Supreme Court made the right call, or the university made the right call? Or good calls were made all around?
I think it's a good compromise. Probably not to the Christians, but from an outside view, it's a good compromise. You still get to keep your rules, but you accept more students. You eventually get your law program recognized, and
Yeah, but for the Christians, it's a bit of a trade-off, right? Because they've had to, if you think back to the ban on religious symbols, what those women, what that law was asking women to do was, give up some of your religious beliefs in order to participate in society, right? If you want a job in the public sector, you need to stop displaying your religious symbols. And those women were asked to accommodate that, right? And again, in the article, it sounded like they didn't really want to accommodate that, but that's what they were being asked to do. And here, we're seeing that the Christians at Trinity Western are being asked to do that too. They're being asked to accommodate kind of the views of larger society and sort of maybe not give up those values for themselves, but give it up at least for the university community and simply encourage people to follow these guidelines rather than to enforce it with expulsion or firing or whatever. So it's a little bit the same, or is it?
But again, like as we said, like you can follow what you believe and what you think in Canada, and I think within reasonable limits. So I think they could have proposed it like optional from the beginning, because then people get to decide, and it's within reasonable limits. Like they're not forcing it, but they're not letting go of all the rules. So they're keeping it
Yeah, and I think that's probably an important point too, is that no one is really stopping Christians from living in accordance with their own values, right? So if you're a Christian and even if you don't go to Trinity Western, but if you do go to Trinity Western, you can live by all of these rules if you so desire. No one is trying to stop you from practicing your religion or having your values or practicing them in your own life, right? That's protected under the charter, and Christians are allowed to do these things at the university. What they're not allowed to do is they're not allowed to enforce them on others, right, in this way. And I think that may have been what the Supreme Court was also thinking about as well. So there's a difference between being allowed to do what you want to do and believe what you want to believe and live your life as you want, but then there's also a difference between trying to make everyone else do that as well, right? And to some degree, those things are necessary. We do that in society all the time. I think it's wrong to kill people. You may disagree, but the law is that there is no killing, right? And I think that's probably a net good, but it's possible that not everybody believes that in Canada, right? Maybe there's people in Canada who think you should be able to kill whoever you want. Certainly when you're standing in line at Starbucks and you're almost late for class, you feel like killing the person in front of you if they don't hurry up. But still, that's not allowed. Sorry, that was a bit of a tangent. So yeah, I think there's a difference between being allowed to practice your religion and live your life according to your values, and then a difference in trying to impose those things on others, right? I think that's a meaningful distinction. So not only whose rights are protected and whose are in more maybe need of protection, but also, are people being allowed to live in accordance with their religious traditions, or are they trying to make others do something in alignment with their views? And I will say, I don't want to inject too much of my personal opinion into this discussion, but that's one of the things that I kind of strongly feel too. Like if you have certain beliefs about things, if you are very strongly Christian and you don't believe in sex outside of marriage and you believe marriage is between man and a woman, that's great. So do that, right? Nobody is stopping you, don't have sex outside of marriage then, and, don't marry anyone of the same gender as you, and you're good. But don't enforce that on other people who might not share your views. And again, I think that's where the Supreme Court was coming from, are these people, are they being prohibited from practicing their religion? And I would argue that I don't think they are. They're just not allowed to enforce that on others, particularly others who might not share all of their views, even if those people are Christian. And there are gay Christians out there, right? Absolutely. There are Christians out there who are living with someone and are in a relationship but are not married, right? And there are gay people who are married or lesbians who are married and they're Christian still. So there's a lot of, Anna, it's like you were talking about before, there's a lot of gray area, right? There's people who are, very fundamentally tied to, the letter of the law in terms of their religion. And then there are some people who are kind of a little more loose about their beliefs and, they believe in Allah or they believe in God or whoever, but they also, they're a little more relaxed about some of the rules as well, right? They've kind of made their own rules, if you will. But it's a complicated issue, and there was some controversy about it. Hey, Sarah. Hi. There was some controversy about it, and and I assume not everyone was happy with the outcome. I assume not everyone. The Trinity Western probably wasn't entirely happy, but they still have their community covenant. They still have their school, their law school. And, they had to make a compromise. Whether it was a reasonable compromise, that's an open question. And again, is that a reasonable limit to their religious freedom? Are they allowed to believe and act and live their lives the way they want? But maybe the reasonable limit there is that, but you're not really allowed to tell everybody else what to do about it, right? You can live how you want to live, but you're not allowed to enforce your beliefs on others who may differ. Maybe.
Is the Quebec ban still on?
Yeah.
It is?
Yeah.
Oh.
So it's currently I think before the courts. I don't know where it is exactly. I know that the initial group of women who were challenging that law asked the Supreme Court of Quebec, I think, to basically like press pause on the law, so make sure it's not in effect until they get a final decision from the Supreme Court. But unfortunately, I think the Quebec Supreme Court said no, the law is still in force until a higher court says otherwise. So the law is in effect on the books probably until the Supreme Court of Canada hears it, and then the Supreme Court of Canada will have the opportunity to say, I don't think you can do this. It's unconstitutional, maybe. But that may take a little while, especially during COVID. Court cases are backed up. Yeah, so that's where we are. You have sort of a look of displeasure on your face. What? Yeah. That's good because it's a complicated position. What's one of your? Give me one of your. Well, we're kind of out of time. Okay, I'm gonna say goodbye to you, online people. I'll see you tomorrow. No, I won't see you tomorrow. I won't see you tomorrow because I'm not here. I'll see you on Monday. Quiz on Wednesday. Have a nice weekend. Goodbye.